we have an interesting set of leaders. What's common between all of them is they are communication leaders from Asia, and they're going to share with us interesting stories of trust. Please welcome on stage Elan Shou, Managing Director, Greater China at Ruderfinn; Johna Burke, Global Managing Director at AMEC; Nugent, EVP and Regional Director, APAC at Archetype; Priyanka Tanwar, Head of Public Affairs and Communications Asia Pacific at LIXIL; and moderating the panel is the one and only Arun Sudhaman, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of the Holmes Report.
Thanks, everyone. We are keenly aware that we're the only thing between you and lunch, so we'll try and keep this as lively and vibrant a conversation as possible. Stories on trust in Asia. I mean, that's quite a broad topic. So what we'd like to do with this conversation is to focus on some of the pressure points when it comes to trust that brands are facing around the region and around the world. We're going to look at the issues that sometimes snowball into crises and how the panelists help brands ultimately rebuild trust when it comes to navigating some of those issues. I think we're very lucky in that we've real breadth of expertise on this session. We have Elan, who's based in China, but of course has a regional role. Johna from the US with a global role. Lee based in Singapore with a regional role. And of course Priyanka, who's based here in India. So to kick things off, I wanted to ask each of the panelists to talk a little bit about where they see specific challenges when it comes to brands losing trust in Asian markets and of course globally. We've got a couple of videos to show you on this topic as well. Lee, I'm going to start with you. I think you have I wouldn't call it a delicate task, but you have perhaps a slightly different Cadbury video to show the audience. So if I could ask the AV team to please cue, or please roll, in fact, Lee's video.
Pig DNA has been found in 2 Cadbury chocolate products in Malaysia.
It is a serious breach of trust.
Muslim retailers are now calling on all Malaysians to unite in a boycott.
We are dumping Cadbury.
Even kilang dia pun patut disita.
This is strictly within the Food Act.
Dihadapi oleh orang Islam sekarang ini akan dihadapi oleh kaum-kaum yang lain di Malaysia ini.
The relationship fast turned sour.
Semuanya mempunyai halal certification.
Products are safe and of highest quality. Oh, it is halal.
I think you can close your eyes and eat that product with confidence.
All its products made and sold in Malaysia are halal.
And its chocolate are free from porcine DNA.
Okay, so everyone crisis. Lee, what's the lesson from that case?
I think that there are a few lessons from that. First of all, it was a fantastic job done by Mondelez and Cadbury. Microphone gone? Yeah, okay. Fantastic job done to restore trust. And there are a few elements of the process on the way that made that campaign so successful. The first one was the restoration of trust via using the religious influences. Yeah, with the microphone issue, sorry. I'll turn off. There we go. How's that? Excellent. So a few things were really important to make that campaign successful. First of all was understanding the importance of the religious influences in changing the minds of the population. Initially, the local brand team came under quite a lot of pressure from their MNC HQ to react very fast and just dispel the issue around the lack of halal certification. Actually, the local team spoke to their leaders at Global HQ and convinced them that this campaign needed to be much, much more nuanced. Working with the religious authorities immediately to get them on side was a really key part of the program. And then secondarily, understanding that the audiences that had reacted spectacularly badly to the rumor were actually typically non-urban, non-professionals. And so the utilization of mainstream media, not social, was hugely, hugely important in the campaign too. TV, radio, and so on. So very traditional channels to reach the audiences where there'd be most impact.
Okay, so a global brand kind of grappling with some of those local nuances. Priyanka, I'll come to you next. You also have a video you'd like to show. Can we please roll Priyanka's video, please?
Who has seen an advertisement that has convinced you that your microphone is listening to your conversations? All of your interactions, your credit card swipes, web searches, locations, likes, they're all collected in real time into $1 trillion a year industry.
The real game changer was Cambridge Analytica. They'd worked for the Trump campaign and for the Brexit campaign. They started using information warfare.
Cambridge Analytica claimed to have 5,000 data points on every American voter.
I started tracking down all these Cambridge Analytica ex-employees.
Someone else that you should be calling to the committee is Brittany Kaiser.
Brittany Kaiser, once a key player inside Cambridge Analytica, casting herself as a whistleblower.
The reason why Google and Facebook are the most powerful companies in the world is because last year data surpassed oil in value. Data is the most valuable asset on Earth.
Let me just cut to the chase. If you and other social media companies do not get your act in order, none of us are going to have any privacy anymore.
The Facebook boss was quick to apologize for past mistakes.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry. I started Facebook, I run it, and I'm responsible for what happens here.
After more than a decade of promises to do better, how is today's apology different?
So we have made a lot of mistakes in running the company. I think it's pretty much impossible, I believe, to start a company in your dorm room and then grow it to be at the scale that we're at now without making some mistakes.
Zuckerberg said he'd be happy to work with Congress on regulations and confirmed Facebook had spoken to special counsel Robert Mueller. But there were signs of lawmakers' lack of understanding about a complex tech industry.
How do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
I see.
Okay, so that was not only a crisis, it kind of speaks to some of the broader issues that I'm dealing with in terms of data security, data breach, and indeed concerns around the pace of innovation. Priyanka, what are the lessons for people in the room from that particular case?
I think the most thought-provoking thing is that 60% of people in Asia distrust social media, and yet Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram are all reporting increased number of users. And I think therein lies the dichotomy of these channels. And there's a huge opportunity for us as communicators to build trust in the digital era, I think. For us, the challenge is that the CMOs or the marketing folks typically usually target only end consumers. And it is us communicators who need to speak to a variety of stakeholders, which range from regulators, investors, governments, even employees. Cambridge Analytica happened because it was an internal whistleblower. So employee activism is on the rise. Consumers and employees in the world no longer want to work with or buy fancy products anymore. They want to do business with organizations which have got a purpose, which have got a future, and which have a very strong stated stake in societal impact.
Okay, so some really interesting aspects there, which we'll come back to. Elan, I wanted to come to you next. I mean, from your perspective, what are you seeing as the biggest challenges companies are facing when it comes to the kind of erosion of trust between them and people?
Okay, it's an interesting topic. There are two areas I would like to address. One is in this highly transparent era, how does company continue to build consistent images throughout? Because now with social media, no matter you believe it or not, we know it adds a lot of exposures to the company, that some areas in the past that never been revealed to the general public now are under spotlight. For instance, if the CEO is talking about really human rights, and at the same time the company is using Sweater House. So all these contradictions today can be exposed very easily while everybody can be a reporter. And at the same time, especially for Asia Pacific, it's a very sensitive society with a lot of cultural differences. Each country, even within each country, it can be so different that you have to respect. So nowadays, we also begin to see polarized opinions within the countries, even within different countries or within the countries. And a strong government involvement. Basically, what I see is across Asia Pacific, the government's involvement is getting stronger and stronger, so they are pushing for a lot of things. So at this time, change always happens. That means it even adds more challenges to the companies in those changes. Under the polarized opinions, where do you stand? Can you continue your consistent message? In the past, we say there's not so much social media to tell your story in different people's opinions. Today they are. Can you talk the walk and walk the talk? Not only talk the talk, right? So I think that's a major challenge.
So the kind of a gap between rhetoric and reality and cultural sensitivities, yes, which are on the rise.
Yes.
Okay. Johna, from your perspective globally, what are you seeing in terms of the biggest trust challenges companies are facing?
The biggest challenge probably is a lack of good information, right? I think we were fortunate enough to talk about it in kind of the prep and the build up to this. Is there is a lot of talk about the environment, there's a lot of talk about these larger social issues, and companies are trying to find their way into the stream of that information. But if that isn't at the core of what their audience is looking for, I mean, there are still regions in the world that food, clothing, and shelter are the most important things, right? Everything else is a luxury. And so understanding the DNA of what their client and what their market looks like is one of the most important things. And I think not jumping to a conclusion because it's in the media or because it's something, but really looking across all of their data, all of those data points to kind of understand impact to their brand. I think socially, it's the absence of civil discourse that has put so much pressure on brands as well, right? We've gotten into this ideal of, you know, everyone has to take a stance because there's kind of this thought shaming of a position of something. And so instead of people historically sitting down and being able to talk about it, and that includes a CEO and the employees. I mean, I think Melissa made a great example of, you know, it wasn't that people were anti or opposed to the gay pride flags, it's just they didn't want crap on their desk, right? And so understanding and clearly communicating is really probably one of the biggest barriers that brands will face, of jumping to these conclusions that a team, and sometimes in the communications team, you're all on the same page of issues, and you need to have that diversity in thought to be able to be representative and reflective of your audience, internal and external.
So really interesting. So it kind of speaks to that global, local balance, which I imagine will resonate for lots of people in this room, especially those of you that work for global companies and maybe even global agencies. So we'll come back to that in a second. I wanted to take up another strand, which all of you more or less touched upon, which is the challenge around disinformation and fake news, because that kind of plays into everything, whether it's polarized opinions, whether it's the issues Cadbury faced, obviously in terms of Cambridge Analytica, which was perhaps disseminating some of those fake news stories. So Lee, let me start with you. How much of a challenge is that for you in this region? And is there really a solution for companies?
Well, it's a really interesting thing to explore, because at the moment, we're not really seeing a huge amount of impact affecting corporates. But we are absolutely ready for it to start happening, particularly when we start thinking about things like deepfake video, the potential to kind of mock comments and commentary from people who haven't actually said those words and so on. And we're starting to see clients be ever more prepared to ready themselves through crisis preparedness programs and so on to deal with this kind of stuff. Obviously, where it really is impacting those in more the social and political spaces already right now. And an example, a direct example from where I live, and obviously we're all aware of the huge, you know, the issues in the United States, the issues in Brexit in Europe, the issues that happen in this country too, but really tiny things. So in Singapore, where I live, a story broke through social media that people would be fined 200 Singapore dollars if they left a mess on their hawker table, which was not true. But this became very, very quickly a really big story internally inside the country, so much so that the government actually had to get out and deny that this was the case through the Department of Environment. What it's led to, things like that have led to where I live in Singapore, is there is now a fake news law in place, highly controversial and certainly not welcomed by the likes of Google, Facebook and many libertarian media commentators. But the government now, I guess that's the most controversial part, gets to choose if something is fake news or not, and can levy enormous fines on the platforms if they don't remove that content. There's a similar law in place in Germany too now, as I understand it. Clearly that's a real challenge for all of us, and you know, changes the dynamic entirely potentially in the future, because you've got to then trust the government really, and I'm not sure, well, if we look at the content that Matthew was talking through us yesterday, I think we know that our trust in government has almost eroded away now. So it's happening. Governments are intervening, and in this region in particular.
Priyanka, I mean, judging from my WhatsApp messages, I'm guessing fake news is more of an issue for brands in India. How do you deal with it? Is a law needed?
I definitely think so. WhatsApp actually did a lot of measures before the Indian general election this year to spread the lack of fake news. But I don't think that's enough, because like Lee said, with deep fake videos, you actually, even an intelligent user cannot figure out what is real and what is fake. And we are sitting on 800 million internet users in China, 500 million in India. So these are huge, huge databases of people, right? And even if we have a law, I'm not sure how it works, because I'm not sure if anyone in any government is qualified or as intelligent as the people who are spreading the fake news or the hackers. So I'm not sure the law is the right answer, but all I know is that organizations really need to step up, CEOs really need to step up and take a very serious view of their scope of responsibility. It goes beyond P&L, it goes beyond growth, it goes beyond return on investor capital. And they have to take a very strong enough view on how they're impacting society, how they're dealing with consumer data, which is as valuable as oil now. And that's something that we can actually do in our organizations or in our brands. I take care of 23 countries in Asia, and one of the brands that we manage in China is actually American Standard. And it's right there in the center of the US-China trade war. So we are sitting in China with a brand called American Standard. And every second day we are dealing with a crisis. So these are the things that actually really are daily challenges. And I don't think the government would have a solution right now.
Gosh, we're smiling, but we feel sympathy for you for every second day a crisis. Elan, we've seen in China brands, you know, the crises that can engulf them, that starts digitally, and then sometimes, like we saw with Siemens, for example, a refrigerator being smashed to pieces on a street in front of the HQ. Does the truth even matter? And if it doesn't, how do you help brands?
The truth does matter. The Siemens refrigerator smash has been years, and over these years, we've seen a lot of fake news. India and other part of the world, it's mostly WhatsApp. In China, it's mostly WeChat. So there are regulations put in place that WeChat basically screen, and people can complain to WeChat saying this is fake news, and WeChat will verify. And if verifies it is fake news, there are ways to verify the resource of the news where you have those data and the facts or the stories that basically the blogger will be closed, the account will be closed. That's one thing. And the second thing is what I told all my brands, all my partners, that get used to it. And prepare yourself. You're not gonna kill all of them because they're coming out every day. And the fake news becomes so popular because they're so eye-catching. They're usually good stories. Come on, they're usually good stories. So they're good stories, so they fly very high, right? Learn from them how they write their stories. And at the same time, several steps you have to take. Okay, there are a famous case study of Starbucks, how they beat the fake news in China. And it's the California court sentencing that all the coffee makers or producers supposed to put a label on their cup saying that it could be some elements, ingredients could be toxic to human health. It has not been sentenced, it's in the progress. And one called Australian Mirror, which is literally a Chinese blogger, okay, pick up this case and put online in WeChat, writing a long blog, a headline is Starbucks is killing people. Okay, name Starbucks and name the ingredients and saying that it can lead to cancer. And it's very interesting, it hits 1 million views in one day, overnight. And you didn't see Starbucks come out just say, it's fake news. No, they didn't. But even though their WeChat account has millions of followers, what they did is they provide the factual materials to the other bloggers, okay, the bloggers of millions of fans, and the bloggers come out to say, this is fake news. So at the end of the day, what Starbucks did is they only provide the facts, what the court saying, it's still going on, and I remember you have to drink up to 60 cups a day to get cancer. So when you provide all those, I'm still drinking Starbucks, by the way. So when you're providing all the facts, today people are getting more and more mature. They read the facts, right? So what I'm saying is, first you need to have a very powerful own media, build your fan base, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter. That's where you can build your authority. and keep it consistently highly reputatable. Don't say it's a lie, tomorrow it become a real thing. Don't make that joke, okay? So have a very, very reputatable on media. Second, make a lot of friends. Today's world, you need allies.
Okay, great points there, particularly on owned media and allies. I think really important for all companies to remember. Johna, is there a risk that brands use disinformation to their advantage? And does that perhaps play into this low trust environment we're living in, where consumers are just skeptical and are willing to believe anything of brands?
I think we, first and foremost, do need to have personal accountability, right? Misinformation, disinformation, and fake news start someplace, right? Usually in the depths of a garage of some, naysayer. But if we are so fast to believe because it meets an ideal that we have, and we aren't going back to those skills that I talked about, right? Critical thinking is the #1 skill that organizations are looking for a reason. If we are so reticent to be able to accept something and then run with it, that's a huge challenge. One of the situations, probably all of you have heard or seen the horrid videos of the United Airlines when they drugged the passenger off of the plane, and it was, a terrible situation. What isn't covered, that I was able to look at when this was all fresh, was on page 4 of the Google results for that story was a 14-minute video of the passenger behind the gentleman who was drugged off the plane. And it was the TSA people, whoever they were, saying, "Sir, we need you to leave the plane. We need you to leave the plane. We're sorry, we're going to have to rebook you." No, I'm not going to leave the plane. Sir, you have to leave the plane. If you don't leave the plane, we're going to forcibly remove you. Then go ahead and forcibly remove you. And I'm not saying that's consent, but I mean, this went on for 14 minutes. And so no one saw that video, right? Because it was on page 4 of the search results. That video has now been taken down by the people from YouTube. The other piece of that is, in the story that broke the initial story, the 5 most prominent people who were talking about that within 1 hour were bots. So taking those images from those influencers who you're able to see and do a simple Google search, you can see that those same profiles that appeared to be Melissa, a mother, a gardener, a dog lover, she also appeared in 1,600 other social profiles. So understanding the implication that, even though it's someone that looks like you, right? It's someone that you are inbred to be able to feel like you can trust, you have to understand that technology is an absolute layer of that. And that goes along with the deep fake news, that even though you're seeing it, it doesn't make it real. And you have to be questioning and looking at the 2 ends of the story and figuring that the truth now lies somewhere in the middle, far beyond what we're hearing from even the best reporters, except the Holmes report, of course.
Well, feel free to disbelieve anything or everything we report, especially if it comes from agencies. Very quickly, because I want to go to the floor, if I can get your quick thoughts on this global-local balance when it comes to actually building trust at a local level. How do you persuade, let's say if it's a global brand, that they need to be listening to local voices more carefully? Sorry, Lee.
I think part of that comes from the relationship that the local teams have with global to start with, and also the openness of global to start with. Sadly, on occasion, that listening only happens after something has gone wrong. And there's a really good example of a situation that arose in Japan. The company Schindler, who make elevators, in 2006, there was an accident in Japan, and a 16-year-old boy was killed in an elevator accident. The local management team at Schindler had wanted to apologize very quickly for this, which would have been highly in tune with Japanese culture. In Japanese culture, you quickly apologize. In fact, the chief executive, the most senior person, would come and apologize seriously and take personal responsibility. However, Schindler was a Swiss-owned business, and culturally inside Schindler was an attitude that you don't apologize, because if you apologize, you open yourself up to legal recourse. You admit fault. And the local team were not listened to, and what happened within 3 years was the Japanese market for Schindler completely evaporated. The second biggest elevator company in the world went to almost zero market share in Japan, and the final consequence was a couple of years later, they exited Japan and sold their business to Otis, their largest competitor, because they just could not repair the trust issue, because they didn't listen to the local team's advice about how to apologize during a crisis. And I think that would be a different situation inside that organization now. So it's really about the culture inside the company to be prepared to listen to us who work in different parts of the world than perhaps the HQ is. And if it's not there, sometimes sadly it's an error that forces that to happen.
I'll come to you, Elan. Do you find the same thing, that cultures within companies are sometimes just not good enough at taking into account local issues?
Yeah, definitely. But what we do usually is share the worst case studies, especially in a similar industry or at critical time. You know that I think that a year ago, Dolce & Gabbana had a very big show in China called The Great Show. It was cancelled the night before, so millions of US dollars was kind of lost. Just simply, they use a video. Basically, the video is chopsticks, meat, pizza, and that's a teaser for their show. And unfortunately, was not really well received by the Chinese Asian population, literally, because to them it's stereotype. But clearly the designer didn't get that point very well, so he began to say some not very polite words on his Facebook, and it was badly received by the government. So the show was cancelled the night before. Okay, so when this comes out, clearly that's the worst case that you could share around, and how headquarters have to pay attention to.
I think if we're going to go to the floor now, do we have a few minutes for questions? Do we? We do. Yeah, we can take a couple. If we have any from the floor, please don't be shy, because we've really got some quite unique voices up here on stage, I think.
Hi, I'm Girish from On Purpose. On the whole global, local sort of alignment, there are often situations where we as communicators, as agencies, are asked to communicate purpose with the intention of eventually securing more profit and without really genuinely having societal impact. Have you ever been in a situation where at a local level, you're not able to genuinely sort of have the purpose within the company that needs to be communicated but have been asked to, and how do you sort of manage that situation?
Good question.
Well, the thing about purpose is it needs to be either universally relevant or very, very locally relevant. So especially speaking in the context of Asia, firstly, there is no one Asia. And you come to Asia and you talk about, let's say, climate change or environment or global warming. It's a bit iffy because those people are still struggling with water, sanitation, and health issues. We are still not at UN SDG 6 for them. So it's clearly whitewashed with a global company which is coming from a developed world where they can actually afford to think about what the planet would be 30 years from now. But you're actually talking to a consumer base that is living in a third world reality where they don't have access to resources even now. So the thing about purpose is that it has to be very authentic. It needs to be very strongly relevant to the communities in which you operate. So leaders, the people of your teams need to really go out there. The biggest currency value of trust today in this world of distrust actually lies in the communities. People are going back to friends, families, people they know. They trust the word again. People are going back to traditional news, where a journalist used to get stories from both sides, have a byline, and that name on the story meant something, right? So I think for purpose, it has to be locally relevant, very well integrated with the communities, and global companies need to realize that the world is at different phases of economic and social evolution.
And I would just like to endorse that as well, because there's actually a piece of research that Kantar did, I think towards the end of last year, that showed while most people who are aware of companies having purpose or following purpose initiatives were aware that climate change and gender equality were the top two, in Asia in particular, in order, and this was a One Asia piece of research, the end to poverty, the end to hunger, and universal healthcare came ahead of gender equality and climate change as issues people really wanted to engage with.
And just before we close, I would say that I think for a lot of companies that have prioritized profit, they find it difficult to reverse engineer their way into purpose. And you see that in a lot of local market situations. Can you join me all in thanking our panel today?